Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So last week we spoke about blood count tests. If you haven't seen that, I will link it somewhere up here for you. But today we're going to talk about a lady named Advocate Barbie, which is another true story from South Africa. And once again, I just want to put my disclaimer that I mean no disrespect to any of the families involved. And if you want to know how she got that name or how I got this Christmassy inspired look, let's get into it.
Intended for mature audiences only.
And yes, I'm wearing my Christmas little jumper and my Christmas earrings because this is our last Sunday in July together. And I look for any excuse to wear my Christmas jumper because Christmas in July, right? So Cezanne Visser, her parents were named Johan and Suzanne. And her parents were high school sweethearts and they went to college together. And in the first year that they went to university or college, Suzanne actually fell pregnant. And Johan and Suzanne came from a very religious family. So they ended up getting married and eventually had the baby who was named Suzanne. So Suzanne and Johan were the parents and Suzanne is the baby. But because they got married prematurely or when they weren't really ready, both families were not very happy about it because they kind of had to now that there was a child involved. And sadly, there was a lot of domestic violence in the household. And Suzanne was quite aware that her mother, Suzanne, was being abused by her father. Suzanne never physically saw her dad hit her mom, but she was aware of it because her mom would walk around the house with bruises on her body and her face. So she kind of put two and two together. And with Suzanne having her dad in the house who was quite abusive, she learned from a very young age that you just need to make your man happy so that you don't get hit or you don't make him angry or you don't have any consequences to his behavior, basically. And it was very important that Suzanne made Suzanne keep appearances up in the public so that Suzanne's abuse wasn't known to everybody else. So Suzanne and Suzanne kept up appearances quite well outside. They made sure that they were a very happy family to the public and that Suzanne, the child, was very, very well-mannered, well-presented, well-dressed young lady. And Suzanne's father was in the South African intelligence agency. So they moved around a lot in South Africa. So she never really stayed in one place for too long. And in high school, by the people who knew her as she got older, Suzanne was described as very intelligent, very smart, but she was very quiet and very gentle with other people. According to Suzanne's mother, Suzanne, she said that Suzanne never had any boyfriends in high school. But later on, Suzanne actually said that she did have a boyfriend in high school. And this was only in grade 9, so she only had one. But this guy broke up with her, or this boy broke up with her, because he said that she was getting basically too serious too quickly. Suzanne matriculated quite high up in her class and she went on to university to study to be a lawyer. So when Suzanne was 24, she applied for her bar in order to complete her articles. And at this time, 24, she was allegedly still a virgin. And yes, this is important for later. And when she actually had the opportunity to go and do her bar exam, she actually failed. And this was the first time in her life that she did fail at anything. And then because she still wanted to be a lawyer, she ended up joining the Independent Bar of South Africa. And the chairman of this bar was a man who was 8 years older than Suzanne, and his name was Dirk Prinsloo. And when you hear me talk about Dirk Prinsloo later on in the story, this true crime story, you'll hear me say the word allegedly quite a lot. And the reasons for that will come on later, but I'm just letting you know I say allegedly quite a lot with him. So Dirk Prinsloo was an advocate and his colleagues referred to him as, quote, a stain on the name of the law profession, end quote. Dirk ran quite a successful practice, which he ran from his home, which was just on the outskirts of Pretoria in South Africa. And it was said by the people who knew him that Dirk was quite obsessed with his appearance. He went to the gym every single day. And it was said that he always dressed in brand clothing, so he never had anything that was not branded on him. It was even said that his underwear and socks were name brands. And when people would describe Dirk, it would basically depend on who you were asking. So some people would say he was very charming, he was very sweet and flirtatious. But one person even described him as saying as soon as she met him, basically, that she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. And even though Dirk had quite a high IQ, it was said that he had a very low EQ. And he was actually fired as a prosecutor because he attacked a female witness. And he was said to apparently have a very, very short temper and a very short fuse, especially when it pertained mostly to women. So back to Suzanne for a second. So when she joined the Independent Bar Association, who was basically run by Dirk Prinsloo, Dirk had a wife, which he was separated from, not divorced from. So he was separated from his wife at the time. And a lot of people said that his wife at the time looked just like Faith Hill. And when people would say that she looked like Faith Hill, his response would be, quote, "She looked nothing like that when we met. I made her into that," end quote. When this young 24-year-old Cezanne met this man named Dirk, he was instantly in awe of everything that he achieved, his private practice. And when they were first getting to know each other, he invited Suzanne and I think 4 of her colleagues over to Dirk's house, and they went there for a braai. And when the colleagues were there and later asked about this, they said that Dirk only had eyes for Suzanne, and they were basically just chatting away. And this braai that Suzanne and her colleagues were invited to were basically the beginning of Suzanne and Dirk's relationship. As the relationship started again and things were blooming, apparently Dirk called Suzanne his princess, babe, and all these beautiful little nicknames. And a lot of people said that Dirk basically worshipped the ground that Suzanne walked on. But then Dirk started saying that he has needs, and Suzanne needs to be able to fulfill these needs. So Dirk invited Suzanne over to his house to watch a movie, but not just any movie. Dirk puts on a adult themed movie and basically tells Suzanne to get on with it, basically. And Suzanne is like, no. And remember, Suzanne was still a virgin at the time, so she told Dirk, listen, I'm a virgin. But Dirk protested basically and said that, you know, you're my girlfriend or whatever this is. And remember from earlier in Suzanne's childhood, she was kind of brought up to always make sure that the men in her life are happy so that they don't react. So Suzanne basically did what she was told. But I just want to make a point that a lot of this information is from Suzanne herself, from her testimony. Is not really Dirk's side, so just keep that in mind when we're going through this whole story. And Dirk eventually convinced Suzanne to move in with him. And remember, Suzanne's parents were religious, so this was very upsetting to them. They were a conservative family, so they kind of wanted Suzanne to get married first before they moved in together. Suzanne moved in anyway because she believed that Dirk would be her future husband. So there is a thing called love bombing, and I'm not sure how official that term is, but it's basically when you just start a relationship and someone showers you in love, in presents, and this is generally said so that they can gain control over you in some sense, or possibly influence your behavior. And this is what is said to have happened in the beginning of Suzanne and Dirk's relationship. From Dirk, Suzanne was showered in really expensive gifts, and she was constantly given so much affection and told how important she is to Dirk and how much she's loved by Dirk. And basically he swept her off her feet, and this was just a romantical whirlwind of a relationship. And coming back to why I said that it was important to note that Suzanne was a virgin, is because they inevitably ended up having their first night together. But Suzanne recalled this as a really horrific night for her, because this night, once they moved in together, she said that he knew that she was still a virgin, but he made no effort to try and comfort her or kind of go slow. He just kind of went for it. And she said she was in a lot of pain, but she just said that she went with it because what else was she supposed to do, basically? Dirk kept promising her everything. He said that, you know, you're so beautiful. I'm going to make you a model. I'm going to make you internationally successful. And she wanted this so badly. So she made sure that she could do anything to try and not get this out of him, but to make sure that this happened and that he kept his promise to her. And remember, Suzanne was working at an advocate at the time. And Dirk said to her that, oh no, you know, I'm going to make you all these successful things. I'm going to make you beautiful, so you don't need to work anymore. I will make sure that you have everything you need. So basically, soon after meeting, moving in together, and having her law degree, she now had no job and was completely financially independent on Dirk. And remember I spoke earlier about Dirk's wife, who a lot of people said looked like Faith Hill? Dirk was not very slow on Cezanne Visser's transformation either. Soon after they moved in, like weeks or just a few months after she moved in with Dirk, Cezanne went from a B cup to an E cup. And it was said that she had 3 breast enlargements. And later on at the trial, Cezanne only remembered having 2. One was to get her breasts enlarged, and one was to remove the breast enlargement because she said that she was getting such bad back pain. And medical records did show that Suzanne had 3 breast enlargements. And all these surgeries were booked scheduled and paid for by Dirk. So Suzanne would also end up getting tattoos, and one of these tattoos would be just above Suzanne's bikini line. That was Dirk's name. Suzanne also had her fat removed from her butt and put into her lip, as well as her hair dyed platinum blonde. And some of the secretaries that worked for Dirk would say that Dirk would even make Suzanne stand on a chair and he would rub down her legs with anti-cellulite like cream, and she wore contact lenses in order to change her eye color, as well as she had a nose job. And another way that Suzanne said that Dirk controlled her, she would make very fancy meals for Dirk, but she was never allowed to eat them, and Suzanne would only have meal replacements. Now remember, Dirk had his private practice in his home, so when clients used to come and visit or like come and actually talk about their case, Dirk was said to be obsessed with sex. So he would have a massive collection of not only porn magazines, the house would be littered with like adult film, and it would just be everywhere. And it was said that when the housekeeper would come and there were like magazines set out, they would be in the toilet, they would be on the kitchen counter, they would be everywhere. And she had actually been reprimanded for touching Dirk magazines because he knew exactly what page and where he was in all of these magazines and on his movie. And Suzanne also said in trial that Dirk was obsessed with sex, not only to watch and to look on the magazines, but with Suzanne as well. So when he demanded it, she was expected to give it. And apparently they had so many toys as well that they would be lying on the floor and they would just be everywhere. And apparently the housekeeper had to pick them up and clean them every day. Shame on you, and that's gross. So besides these obviously very dirty birdies, Dirk now wanted to keep his promise and put Suzanne's name in life. And even though Suzanne was not technically best known for her singing, Dirk registered Suzanne for South African Idols, which Suzanne actually made it to the second round. Because of how Suzanne looked and also her profession, she was quite popular in the media, and that's how she got her nickname Advocate Barbie. And because she was becoming so popular, she was actually asked to appear on a TV show with Ferdinand Robbie. He was constantly gawking at her appearance, and he actually asked Dirk if he could sign her breast, and then he would go on to kiss the other one. And Dirk was like, oh yeah, you could do this, you know, kind of showing off what he created. But all of these interviews, all of this fame was happening basically within months of Dirk and Suzanne moving in together. It was such a short period of time. This was not years that we were talking about. This was weeks to months of them moving. But Suzanne later said that during these weeks and months, and after she basically had her transformation, Dirk would no longer call her beautiful, nice pet names or nicknames like Babe, Princess. He would now be a lot more violent sexually. And his nickname for Suzanne was now Slut. And Suzanne now had to call him God, and that was even his number in her phone was named God. And they would also take very compromising pictures of each other, and back then they would have to be developed by like the little Kodak stands or whatever brand you had. But one of the employees at these photo developing stands actually leaked some of the photos of Suzanne in her very compromising positions. And Dirk did try and stop this from getting out and getting into the press, but it was too late. And now Suzanne and Dirk were known for their very weird sexual interests, and also because of the professions that they had. So they were very popular in the media, being lawyers and having this weird private life as well. And the PAs that Dirk had, some of the secretaries as well as Suzanne, said that Dirk had a very prevalent interest in young prostitutes. And when I say young, I mean young. It was apparent that Suzanne's job was to go to brothels and find the youngest looking prostitute there, some only being 14 years old. And eventually it became apparent that Dirk started getting bored of these young prostitutes, so he wanted Suzanne to come up with a new way to find other young girls that he could. So Suzanne came up with a plan that she would now go to children's homes. Yeah, you heard me right. She was going to go to children's homes to say that she wanted to give them a weekend away and to be able to foster them for the weekend so that she could spoil the girls before they went back to their home. And some of the children's homes did decline that Suzanne take them away for the weekend. And some of them did know about Suzanne, and remember, she was quite popular in the press. So they were enamored and obsessed with how beautiful she was. So some of them did let Suzanne take children home. And back in the day, there was no real procedures for how you could take children home. But after this case and what happened to these girls, I'm assuming or hoping that procedures are a little more strict now. And when Suzanne was looking for these girls, she didn't just go there and be like, oh, I want that one. She knew exactly what she wanted in each girl. So she went and said, I want a girl that is slim. She must be slim. She must be young. but she must be slightly developed. So one of the girls that were taken, so we're just going to call her Christine. But this girl, Christine, she was quite keen on going with Dirk and Cezanne because she heard about them in the media as well. And she heard about all the good things that she would hopefully get, like the presents and the gifts and just the experience with them. Christine apparently wanted to be a lawyer as well when she grew up. So she was quite interested in Suzanne and Dirk in that way. So during the day, Dirk picked Christine up and they went grocery shopping together. And when they got home, they unpacked the car and apparently Christine left like a bottle of something in the car. So she ran and got this bottle from the car. And when she came back, Dirk said to her, "You're looking so pretty when you run." She thought this was really weird. Firstly, the first thing that popped into her head was, why do you think that someone is attractive when they run? That's so weird. But she also said that she felt very uncomfortable by this. Then Dirk turned to her in the kitchen and asked what her views were on sex before marriage. And she just looked at him and was like, "I will want to stay a virgin until I'm married." Guys, remember, she's 15. And this is like a 30-year-old man. Really grown. But by now they're in the house and this little girl is blown away by everything she's seeing. He lived in a very nice house, so she was very impressed by what he had created for himself. Until they went into the kitchen, because on the table, like on that little island in the kitchen, was a statue of a male body part that had been, like, I think it was gold plated or whatever, engraved into the body part. It said "best ever," and it was a gift from Suzanne, which they just left in the kitchen. And then things just got worse as Suzanne came home. This was around the time that Suzanne was in the whole idols contest. So when she heard about how good she was, she came back and Dirk and Suzanne wanted to celebrate. So that just gives you a timeline. This is very, very short-lived into their relationship that this all happened. So by Suzanne and Dirk celebrating, they basically performed sexual acts in front of this little girl, this child. And Suzanne turned to her and told her that if she wants to learn, she must watch. But she started crying, and then Dirk got upset with her and told her she must go to her room, which she ran to because she was so disgusted by what these people were doing. And then the next day, Suzanne took this young girl to watch her get a Brazilian and try to force her to get one. But now she couldn't exactly make her do anything because she was in public. And this young girl was so traumatized and so upset by everything that had happened to her that she just wanted to go home and she couldn't wait for Sunday to come. But that Sunday, before she was allowed to go home, Dirk and Suzanne took her to go and have breakfast and they asked her about a specific girl in the girl's home. And this girl was named Charmaine. And she was 11 years old. And when they were asking the questions, they asked whether Charmaine had specifically been abused in any way. And by asking this, I'm not sure if they were asking so that they could maybe not get girls that were abused, or if that's the particular victim that they were interested in, which either way is gross and disgusting and shameful. But this young girl said that she didn't know anything about Charmaine. They were a little bit different in age, so she didn't really like hang out with her that much. Also, I don't think that type of history is discussed with by children. But eventually she was dropped off and said that she could go back to the home, and she just went straight to her room and cried, and she didn't say anything about it because she was scared. But Dirk and Suzanne were determined that they wanted this little girl, Charmaine, for whatever reason. But obviously this isn't a real name. Her name was kept private. But the home didn't want to let Charmaine go because she was young. They thought that she was way too young to be fostered for the weekend. And also Charmaine had a very, very tragic childhood and they just didn't think that she was ready. But I don't know if Suzanne was smart or just very cunning. But she basically waited for the lady who ran the little child's home to be on leave, because the other workers who were there, they didn't really have or listen to the conversation that happened between the head of the home and Suzanne and Dirk. So they went there and picked up Charmaine, and they were fine with it because they assumed that they were just going to foster them for the weekend. But Charmaine was not interested. She was not having it. She went out crying, kicking and screaming, and Suzanne just basically pulled her to the car and said, just like, get in, basically. And the ladies who worked at the children's home said that Dirk and Suzanne were wearing the strangest thing to pick up Charmaine. When they went to pick her up, they said that she was wearing tights that were 3 times too small for her and a bikini top that barely covered anything. And Dirk was wearing those really tight cycling shorts and nothing on top. So that's all he was wearing, was cycling shorts. And they said, oh no, they're just going to the gym. But eventually they did go home. And sadly, they did end up sexually assaulting Charmaine. They forced her to watch adult movies. And when they returned Charmaine on the Sunday, she was still crying. And Dirk turned around and threatened her and said, if you say anything, I will hurt you. And remember, this was an 11-year-old child. So for a while, Charmaine kept quiet. She was scared, but eventually she couldn't hold on anymore, and she told one of the head ladies at the home. The head lady did go to the first girl that was taken, and she went and asked her if she had any similar experiences, and she said yes. She came out with everything that she experienced. Sadly, it was not reported to the police at the time because they felt that it wouldn't be any benefit to the children. But what they did do is they called other children's homes and warned them about Dirk and them wanting to get these little girls. So the first home where Suzanne and Dirk got hold of Christine and Charmaine had been hearing so many calls from all these other children's homes in the vicinities that they eventually did decide to report it. Eventually the authorities, they took very long to even get traction on the story. So sadly, Suzanne and Dirk did end up getting another young girl, and her name was Janine Duplessis. And the reason that her name is public and it's her real name is because sadly she did end up passing away. So I'm going to give a backstory on Janine just for perspective in terms of the whole story. And Janine was one of 4 children, and she was born to parents who were both alcoholics and abused drugs. When she was younger, Janine and one of her sisters would beg on the streets for extra money, but Janine soon figured out that instead of just begging for money, she could make more money by kind of selling herself, and she turned to prostitution. And sadly, she learned this from her mother, who did this in order to support her drug habits. And when Janine was younger, she and possibly other members of her family were sexually abused by one of the members in her family, and she did tell her parents, but her parents kind of said you just need to grin and bear it. So instead of going home and having to deal with the sexual assault and abuse at home, her and her sister would rather live and sleep on the street. And Janine was only 11 years old when she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And in order to cope with having to unfortunately prostitute herself, living on the streets basically, she turned to drugs and alcohol to kind of numb the pain and sadness that she was feeling. Janine did end up living with 17 other street children in a derelict building, but a lot of people were trying to get the children out of this building because they didn't want them in there, firstly for their safety, but also because they wanted to use the building for something else. And the fight that was happening between the street children and I think the locals or the government was making news. And who do you think was watching the news and watching these children very closely? Cezanne Visser. She made sure that she put her name out there to say that she will try and help in any way that she can for these young girls. But however, Janine eventually was fed up with the life that she was living and decided to try and get her life back to normal, or as normal that it could be. And she tried to clean up her act. She actually went back to school. And she was said to be so proud of her school uniform and so proud of going back to school. And there was a lady, I think her name was Sue, I could be wrong, but she tried to help Janine as much as possible. She knew her from quite a while back. She tried to help her sister and other street children with just giving them food and giving them shelter when she could. And eventually Suzanne found out about this lady named Sue who was helping all these children, and she said that she wanted to help. So she would go over there as well to try and give food or comfort to these young ladies. And she took quite a like to Janine. And eventually Suzanne asked if she could basically take Janine out on an out, but obviously she had to ask for Janine's mother's permission. But Janine's mother was pretty skeptical about this lady Suzanne, because not only the way she looked, but she also heard rumors from around with the child's home and stuff, so she was pretty skeptical. But eventually Suzanne kept persisting, and she would take Janine out on small outings, like just going to the shop and buying really nice things. So what her mother was hearing from Janine was all positive things about Suzanne. So Suzanne asked if Janine could stay over for the weekend, and her mother eventually said yes. And this was the weekend of Janine's 14th birthday. So all these horrible things that Janine had to go through was all before she was 14. So Janine was collected on Friday, and as soon as Janine walked into that house, she was shown all these toys, adult toys. I'm not sure if it was because maybe Janine had already experienced so many things, but it didn't have the same effect on her as Charmaine and Christine had, so she was not as taken aback by these things. But basically the Friday night was pretty normal, and then on Saturday morning, Suzanne made Janine a cup of Milo, and after that Janine says that she hardly remembers anything. Janine recalls that she saw some flashing lights, and she said that the only thing she does remember quite visually was that Suzanne and Dirk did sexually assault her. Suzanne made a promise to Janine's mom that she would drop her off Sunday morning early, because remember it was Janine's birthday and Janine wanted to celebrate it with her family. Instead of dropping Janine off early, they dropped her off late afternoon, and when they dropped her off, Janine was so groggy she could barely stand, and it looked like she had a very, very rough weekend. But when Janine got home, she didn't say anything to her mother, but her mother eventually kept pressing and asking Janine, what's wrong? Why are you looking like this? And Janine eventually came out of it and told her mother. But remember, when Janine reported years ago that someone in her family was sexually assaulting her, her mother didn't really do anything about it then. So she was quite hesitant to tell her mother. Someone in the family had overheard this conversation during this young girl's birthday party, basically forced her mother to go and tell the police about it. And what Dirk and a lot of people didn't know is that Janine was sadly HIV positive at the time, that she was sexually assaulted by Dirk and Suzanne. The case was reported to the police and it was given to a man named Carl Cornelius. And Carl went to the child's court first to go see if there were any cases that had been similarly reported. But I don't know why, but the child court seemed to have different rules and they wanted to kind of investigate things themselves first. But Captain Cornelius, he didn't give up. He spoke to a lot of people that were linked to Dirk and Suzanne because obviously they were the ones that Janine had reported. But sadly, at the same time that Dirk and Suzanne were being investigated, Janine started kind of relapsing because of obviously the trauma that she had just recently been through. So in December 2002, Captain Cornelius ended up entering the home of Dirk and Suzanne, where he ended up leaving with 2 computers, boxes full of porn magazines, and a photo album that was found in Dirk's safe. And apparently Dirk was like shouting at them the whole time, being like, you don't know who I am. And eventually when Captain Cornelius turned and went to the safe, Dirk all of a sudden went silent. So what was in the safe that Dirk was protesting so much about was this photo album. And inside the photo album there were all the girls that Suzanne and Dirk had fostered, and they were all unfortunately in compromising positions. And next to this photo album were prescription pills, and one of the pills were Rohypnol, if you don't know, is also known as date rape drug, as well as Viagra was found. Suzanne and Dirk were taken to separate police stations to be investigated separately, and within minutes of Suzanne getting to this police station, she spilled the beans. She said, I will tell you anything about Dirk as long as basically I get a lesser sentence or I'm free. But Suzanne and Dirk were given bail as long as they promised they wouldn't be in contact with each other and that they wouldn't be in contact with any of the witnesses or any of the victims. So Suzanne left Dirk's house obviously and went to live with her mother. And Suzanne's mother said, you need to end this relationship with Dirk. It's obviously toxic, it's very bad. And Suzanne did, but Dirk didn't care. On Valentine's Day he sent her flowers and he tried so hard to get in contact with her. And the flowers that he sent was in like a vase, I think it was porcelain or whatever, and Suzanne's mother really wanted to throw them away. Suzanne didn't, and they got into a massive fight about it, and eventually the vase broke. Really made Suzanne really angry. So after the fight with her mother, Suzanne then moved back in with Dirk, even though their bail said they weren't allowed to. But eventually Dirk sold this house that they were known to live in and they moved to a farm in quite a quiet area. And sadly, Captain Cornelius was struggling to get enough information to kind of really seal the deal and convict Dirk and Suzanne. And apparently Dirk was hiring people left, right and center and threatening the witnesses. And sadly, at the same time that all of this was happening, Janine was very heavily on drugs at the time. So basically there was such a little evidence that the case was postponed until December 2005. And at this time, Dirk and Suzanne were charged with 11 offenses each, but the court deemed them not to be a flight risk. So Dirk was allowed to travel out of the country as long as he let the government know. So once he did travel to Russia and he came back, but then around November 2005, Dirk said that he wanted to go to Russia because it was Christmas time coming soon and he wanted to be with his family. The court let him. So the court let him, after committing these horrible offenses, allowed to go travel the globe that he could enjoy Christmas time. Then they postponed the trial to April 2006. And of course, Dirk never returned. He was not in contact with anyone. No one from South Africa, no longer Suzanne, no one. And an international warrant was issued, but he's still missing. So apparently with Dirk out of the way, Suzanne no longer wears fitted clothing anymore. She no longer dyes her hair. She wears glasses and she has put on a little bit of weight because she eats normal food now. And she also had her implants removed. And the cops did spend many years looking for Dirk, but inevitably they did have to move on with the trial. So Suzanne was informed that if Dirk did not return, she would have to face trial herself and still be charged with these 11 offenses. So in June 2009, Dirk was found and re-arrested, but not in Russia or South Africa, but actually in Belarus. And he was arrested for bank robbery, which he blamed on his new girlfriend in Belarus because he said that she was leaking information to the police that had his email and password in, and that's how he was caught. But actually, he just left his passport in the bank that he robbed. But of course, he would never admit this. But he was charged for his crimes, and he did get 10 years for this. He was given the option whether he wanted to go back to South Africa, and he said no, obviously. But the trial had to go on, and Suzanne was eventually put up on trial. And in 2010, Suzanne was convicted and sentenced for her crime. She was only sentenced 7 years in prison. But sadly, in the same year that Suzanne was convicted and sentenced, Janine unfortunately committed suicide. But Suzanne would only end up serving 3 years in prison because she eventually got parole and spent the rest of her time in house arrest. But she was also registered as a sex offender. But in 2018, Suzanne ended up marrying a new man who was from KwaZulu-Natal and is now Suzanne Smith. And Dirk is still incarcerated in Belarus but is awaiting deportation, which means that he will be deported from the country and returned back to the country that he came from, which is not South Africa. Remember, that was Russia. So that means that he can possibly escape again and never face trial for the crimes that he committed. I doubt that he'll ever come back to South Africa, and sadly for one of his victims, it's already too late for her to see any type of justice for the crimes that were committed against her. That is all I have for you on this case today. It was a big one, and I think that in the beginning I felt quite bad for Suzanne, but now I don't. I think that in the beginning she may have been a victim, but now I think that she just... So this was a very interesting case, a very long one, so I hope that you enjoyed it. But thank you again for being here with me today, and don't forget to stay safe, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!